All right, so this is now part two for this little mini training, and at this point we have our background scene, and the prior tutorial we show how to create it. Let's go store it so we make sure we have a safe copy. Oh, I already did. Let's delete some of these, we don't need them all. We might want to keep one or two, but let's delete some of those. And then delete this duplicate, boom. Okay, so we have this image here, and now I want to put some spaceship in front, or some satellite, or maybe a moon like Phobos and Deimos, something on Mars. Let's go. So we have the filter with the new render option for rendering geometry. Now that one currently only loads OBJ file, but boy, what a new universe it opens with that. You have, first it takes a few seconds to take a look at your entire disks, and I have some slow external drives, so that took a second. Initially, it may show you inside your Howler installation, and you have a geometry subdirection with a subdirectory with a lot of trees. So these are the original three-dimensional trees that we have included for quite a while. There are some test objects too. Terrain is one I created. You won't have that by default. But there's the dragon, and if I double click that, you'll see a dragon loading in, and it may be already centered, and sometimes it's a little bit off, and you may have to look for it. So go into the bounding box mode so you can see it more easily if it's a big object, if it takes a long time. Let's say if you have it in wireframe mode, you can see this one's very detailed already. And by the way, the rendering is still in infancy. There's a new one being developed and being integrated, but that will be for the next major release. It's quite a bit of work. So please start with this, and hopefully we can then see a couple of other things still going. I'm going to load a simpler object to be a little bit more interactive just for the purpose of the demo. I have a rover here, I think. And yeah, it's very small. You can barely see it. I need to go. Let's go and reset the view. So this is going to be to get an idea of what can you do with the interface here. What are the different options? So obviously, or maybe I have an elephant here. Yep, there's a nice little elephant. And that one also is not super much on the fast side. Let's see what the wireframe looks like. No, it's actually fairly small, fairly light. We do have backface culling. You see half of the polygons are missing on the back end, which is okay. We don't see them usually there, right, when it's a closed watertight object. But sometimes that might be a feature that maybe in the future will let you control. I would love to have a button up here below the render mode that says backface culling on or off. And then there's another feature. Oh yeah, keep this render mode, right? So right now, if you go to bounding box mode, as you're rotating, it's in bounding box. But when I let go of my mouse button, boom, it switches back to final rendering. And if I want wireframe, that's nice too. But sometimes I actually would love to keep that wireframe. So I don't have that option right now. Now I have an option to just take a screenshot with whatever screen capture tools I have, and I can then composite it back or do something else with that wireframe. But it'd be nice if I had a way to keep it. And also with the shaded mode, if you zoom in a little bit, let's use a zoom option here. You can tell with the right button I can move it up and down. That's while you're in the rotate mode here, right? The rotate mode rotates the camera. What happens is with the left button, let's just do that quickly. Let's go step by step through all of these options. So wireframe mode, you rotate and you see some polygons will disappear if they are backface culled, but shaded mode, they're still there. And one thing you'll notice when you go into the shaded mode and you rotate, it's now a fairly low resolution view. You can tell the staircasing here. Take a close look at this contrast between the very bright and the dark part of the elephant. As you rotate it, it goes into little staircases, right? So it's a very low resolution, quick render for a first approach. Same thing with the front of the nose here, the trunk. But then when you let go for final render, it gives you an anti-aliased rendering and quite a bit better. Not perfect in all ways by comparisons. We don't have ambient occlusion here. We don't have cast shadows. That's all coming. I mean, it's going to be so much faster on the GPU as well. Right now here, this is an older run length encoded renderer. And it does the trick for what we needed it for, the trees, but of course we always want more. So here we go. Let's go back to the wireframe mode. I wanted to take a look at a few other options here. Let's rotate it. And so what else can we do? If it is too big, too close, you can go to this mode here, the move object or move camera, and then the left button doesn't rotate, it moves away or into the scene. Now you can actually go into the scene, so now rendering will perhaps capture still some of it, but you'll see some of it will have disappeared in the front clipping plane. So sometimes that's great if you have a very large structure and you want to actually move into it so that you can see what's inside, or part of the stuff is clipped away in the front, like I don't know, a spacecraft that crash landed and you want to show half of it broken open. You can certainly do that. So while you're in this move camera mode, you can move in and out and also sideways with the left button, and you can, with the right button, you just move up and down. Right. Now, while you do this, you can also switch to the left button here. That's the default one, the orbiting or rotating the camera. And with that, you have two things. You can rotate, and then with the right button, you can move it both ways, sideways and up and down. Right, so that's a quick way to center it, if you will. Another quick way is usually reset, but it doesn't necessarily center it exactly. Right? It might be a little bit off, and sadly, sometimes it's completely off, and you have to go look for it. The best way to look for it probably is the bounding box, because the bounding box is usually a little bit bigger than the entire, every detail. And sometimes it's much bigger. You might have a small elephant here and a smaller elephant here and nothing in between. So if you're close enough, you might not even see it. Right now here we do see it because it's in the middle. But what if the elephant was on the left and another elephant or a mouse on the other side, and then you have really nothing to see in the middle? And it will try to center on that and you don't get to see anything. So you have to be a little bit inventive and creative until perhaps we find other ways to make it more general purpose and always center on it. So let's say I want that elephant around here. And what else can we do here? We can, with the mouse, if you have a scroll button on your mouse, you can zoom in. So that's actually this button here. Look at the values as they change, right? You have 0.35, 5.4 point something. So you see this is using the zoom with the scroll button on the mouse. Okay, so that's one shortcut also to remember. If you go into wireframe mode, it's doing a final render on each of those. That's another thing to notice. It's not switching to the low resolution with the thumb, because it thinks it's just done with one event and then render, right? So the zoom, it's like you're doing the zoom but not staying on the zoom. You're doing one zoom at a time. And if it's fast enough, it's great. Now there's a couple of lights controls here. First of all, you can change the orientation of this. Two lights, right? There's a reddish or yellow orangey light. Click that so you can change it. Maybe you want it to be greenish and do something like this. So now we have more of a greenish light over here. And as you rotate it, it's quite dominant right now here. The other one here is a bluish light perhaps. And you now have the object, let's say if you rotate it, you now have the reddish, you have the bluish light here. But it's not a very intense one, and if you want, you can change the brightness of all the lights here. This one is a global, sort of a brightness control for all of the lights. And not just these two, there's also an ambient light. This one is black right now, or very dark, and if you want, you can give it a reddish tint. That way it's, for example, if you have an elephant on the surface of Mars with a reddish glow from the ground, you can give it that extra reddish look, even if by itself the light sources are not shining much red on it. So normally you would do something like a white light source and then perhaps another bright, or maybe with a little bit of a bluish tint from the sky. But you can also give it a bluish tint, of course, with the ambient side. So give it not too much, just a little bit. And then with that you have a really bluish elephant. All right, so what else? We have the brightness. And that's about it. That sums it up. Now, where do we use this? Oh, no, there's actually much more. Hold on. Let's say we want to paint this elephant somewhere, right? So we want to have him in this orientation and in this orientation. And we don't want to do that quite yet, damaging the background image. So you store it into a brush. You create a brush, and then you can give it a little bit of different orientation. And now instead of creating a new brush, you do an add to brush. And so you have different angles, different sizes also if you zoom in and out. Maybe this one here goes up a little bit so you see the whole elephant, and it's still going to be added to the brush. Let's say I also want a different lighting effect here, maybe one light source only, so this one I'll just make it really dark. And the ambient light, I don't want it, or just very little of it. So now we have just one light source that controls the entire shading, if you will. And I also want it to be seen from this angle and keep adding. So you can easily add multiple frames, snapshots to to a single brush, and so that what becomes what we call an anim brush or an animated brush. And let's say we have one more or two more that we want. So you have a whole collage, a whole collection of little spaceships, elephants, whatever you want to put there. And so then we are done. And you notice we now have a stored copy of this brush. It shows the first image that we snapped into it, but we do have a film strip you can show, and you can see every single frame that's in that collection. Now, how do we extract those? Well, first of all, one way to use them is, of course, to paint with them. Right? So if we undo and we didn't have the elephant there, we still now have it in the brush. It's not that full size, maybe we want it this big, but as you paint, it's cycling through all of these elephants. Right, so we have an armada of elephants or spaceships or cars or whatever you rendered. You have a whole armada in the brush, and whatever size, orientation, color, lighting effects, and so on you captured is now in that brush. And there's of course many more things you can do in the brush itself. The brush settings here allow you to add more random size to it. So they will actually be different in size as well, not looking like too much in repetitive appearance. A random size, let's give it even more of that. Random position, so they're not following your path too well. They're a little bit off, and so even more random in appearance. There could be a random angle, a little bit of a tilt left and right. So you can see they're like free floating in space. And what else could we do possibly to these poor elephants? We could do some random hue changes, saturation, and some brightness value. Right? So now they're really all appearing quite different from each other, and you wonder, is this really the same family? They do look different now. Anyway, so that's the type of thing you can do when it's in a brush, but sometimes you really don't need it in the brush. Sometimes you really just want these pictures out into a sequence of images. So let's say you have the full size here. How do you collect that? I mean, you could go like this, go to the stamp mode, and then stamp one down. Let's see, first click, it doesn't take it because it needs to know we have to focus on that. Now we have it, but okay, with the random orientation, and so it's going from one frame to the next. Each of these frames that I have are going to be taken out. So I could certainly do something like what do we call it? A bunch of have one here, have one here, have one here, and so on, and create, even without any of these random positions and color and size color changes. If I want this thing here unmodified, this one here, change the angle, change the position, random size, so we don't have any of that. It's all zeros. And here too, you can go just 0 for no changes. So you really keep what's in the brush, and that's what you see color-wise and position, orientation, and size-wise. So let's say we do this. So you could certainly go, perhaps show a grid there, some horizontal artist guides, right? Perhaps even more of those. Something like this. So you could put one here. Well, that's too big. Why do we still have? Okay, let's make him a little bit smaller. One here, and you see it's going from one to the next. I moved the mouse a little bit here, so you got to be careful about that. But you can easily create a whole arsenal, as we call a sprite sheet, right? A sheet of multiple sprites, and that's something you use in games if you have sort of an animation you want to create or a collection of images. But there is another way to do that too, and instead of creating these into a single sheet, one thing you can do is expose all that into an animation, one frame at a time. And so what I'm talking about is I'm clearing this. Let's get rid of the artist guides. What I'm going to do is make it full size so I see it as it is, and then I'm going to create an animation of maybe 12 or 15 frames. I don't need too many. I don't think there are 20 frames in my animated brush. If I did count, I might remember how many. But here's an animation with a bunch of empty frames, and I can keep the frames rendered into it from the brush keyframer. Right, so with the brush keyframer, you see now a little window here that shows where the brush is going to appear. Let's just leave it right here in the middle, and we don't need to keyframe or modify anything, we'll just render it. And so it's going through the entire sequence as it's going through all frames in the animation. And there you go, it's done. We can now minimize or hide the preview on the frame, but now you can see everything from this animated brush has been rendered out. And of course there's more frames than frames in the brush, so this one here repeats over here. We have it like twice in there almost, so we don't need them all. Let's go select this entire range and right click to delete this block. So now we have indeed one frame. If we want that last one to be repeated, we'll just copy it. So copy this frame and then put it in here. Insert before. Actually, this is insert before, so we have to do this differently. We can grab this one and cut this frame and there right click, insert before. Now we have the sequence, and this frame is a copy of this one here. Alright, so a lot of things to explore here. Hope this was somewhat useful, and we'll see you next time, and have fun.